It is early morning on the reserve. The light is low and flat across the grass, and somewhere in the 2,000 acres of fenced land in an undisclosed location in the United States, Romulus is moving. He is over 90 pounds now and still growing. His coat is thick and pale, and his skull is wider than any gray wolf alive today. He does not know that his blood was reconstructed from a 72,000-year-old ear bone. He does not know that 17 governments have quietly asked Colossal Biosciences what the legal status of his species is and received no clear answer. He does not know that if he survives to full maturity and the program is declared a success, the question of what to do with everything else that has ever gone extinct becomes politically unavoidable for the first time in human history. He is just running, in the early light, getting bigger every week, and the world outside the fence is trying to figure out what it does if he makes it. Part 1. The legal vacuum. Start here because this is the part nobody is talking about loudly enough. The Endangered Species Act protects animals that are endangered. The IUCN Red List categorizes species by their conservation status. International wildlife treaties govern the movement, trade, and management of protected animals across borders. These frameworks are the legal architecture of conservation. They have been built and refined over decades to manage the relationship between human activity and wild animal populations. None of them have a category for a de-extincted species. The direwolf is not endangered. Endangered means a species exists in critically low numbers and faces risk of extinction. The direwolf is extinct, which means it has no status under the Endangered Species Act. It has no IUCN listing. It has no international treaty protection. It exists in a legal vacuum that nobody created intentionally because nobody anticipated needing to fill it. Colossal Biosciences currently owns Romulus, Remus, and Khaleesi the way a biotech company owns any product of its research program. They are living animals, but they are also intellectual property. Their genome is patented. The process that produced them is patented. The cell lines that could produce more of them are proprietary. If they survive to full maturity and reproduce, the offspring of patented animals in a legal vacuum are owned by the company that holds the patent, which means a breeding population of direwolves would be corporate property with no independent legal status and no government body with clear jurisdiction over their welfare or their ecological impact. 17 governments asked about this. None of them received a clear answer, because there is no clear answer yet. The legal framework does not exist, and it will not exist until the political pressure to create it becomes unavoidable, which happens the moment the program is declared a success. The wolves surviving does not just change biology. It creates a legal emergency that every conservation framework on Earth is currently unequipped to handle. Part 2. The proof of concept problem. Colossal Biosciences is not a single species company. The direwolf program was not the goal. It was the demonstration. Running parallel to the direwolf program is the woolly mammoth program. The target date for a viable cold-adapted mammoth hybrid is currently cited as 2028. The Thylacine program, aimed at restoring the Tasmanian tiger which went extinct in 1936, within living memory of people still alive today, is running simultaneously. The dodo program exists. The northern white rhinoceros program, which works with a species not yet fully extinct, is using the same technology pipeline. Each of these programs was waiting for the same thing: not funding, not technology. Proof that the end-to-end process works, that you can extract ancient DNA, reconstruct a partial genome, identify the key differentiating variants, edit them into a living relative, produce viable offspring, and have those offspring survive, grow, and develop normally. The direwolf program produced that proof on April 7, 2025. Romulus and Remus and Khaleesi are alive and growing and developing in ways that confirm the pipeline functions from DNA extraction to living animal. If they survive to full maturity, that confirmation becomes definitive, and definitive proof of concept unlocks the entire downstream program simultaneously. The mammoth timeline accelerates. The Thylacine timeline accelerates. The political and financial pressure to move faster on every other program increases because the question of whether it is possible has been answered, and now the only remaining questions are prioritization and resources. Three wolves surviving in an undisclosed location in the United States is the event that determines whether mammoths walk the Siberian tundra by 2035, whether Tasmanian tigers move through Tasmanian forests within a decade, whether the dodo, which most people treat as a symbol of irreversibility, becomes reversible within a human lifetime. The wolves are the door. Everything else is behind it. Part 3. What it does to conservation. This is the consequence that conservation biologists are most publicly worried about and most privately terrified by. Conservation depends on urgency. The reason governments allocate resources to protecting endangered species, the reason international treaties get signed, the reason people donate to wildlife funds is the irreversibility of extinction. Once it is gone, it is gone. That irreversibility creates urgency. Urgency creates political will. Political will creates funding and legislation, and the international frameworks that currently represent the best tool humanity has for slowing the rate of biodiversity loss. If extinction becomes reversible, what happens to the urgency? This is not a hypothetical concern. It is a documented psychological phenomenon. Research on what is called moral licensing shows consistently that when people believe a problem has a technological solution waiting in the wings, their willingness to make immediate behavioral changes to prevent the problem decreases. The solution removes the urgency. The urgency was doing most of the work. If the public believes, because of Romulus and Remus and Khaleesi, that extinct species can be brought back, the political calculus of conservation changes permanently. Not immediately, not dramatically, but at the margin. In the legislative negotiations where one senator's position on an endangered species bill is shaped by whether their constituents think extinction matters. In the international treaty talks where one government's willingness to restrict logging is influenced by whether its population believes the species at risk are permanently irreplaceable. At the margin, over decades, the message that extinction is no longer permanent could cost more species than the de-extinction program ever recovers. And the wolves surviving is the event that sends that message to the broadest possible audience. Part 4. The reproduction question. Three animals cannot sustain a population. The genetics are clear. A founding population of 3 individuals, even with careful management, produces inbreeding depression within a few generations that makes long-term viability impossible. If the goal is a self-sustaining direwolf population, rather than 3 animals on a reserve, Colossal needs to produce more. They can. The cell lines exist. The surrogate protocol is established. The genome edits are documented and repeatable. Producing additional animals is not a scientific question anymore. It is a decision. And if the 3 pups survive to full maturity and the program is declared a success, the pressure to make that decision increases from every direction simultaneously. Conservation organizations arguing for genuine population viability. Governments interested in the rewilding potential. The public whose investment in the story of Romulus and Remus demands a next chapter. And Colossal itself, whose entire business model depends on demonstrating that de-extinction produces outcomes beyond 3 animals on a private reserve. A breeding population of direwolves changes the conversation entirely. 10 animals is a program. 50 animals is a population. 100 animals is an ecological question that the modern North American landscape has never had to answer. Because the direwolf did not disappear from a vacuum. It disappeared from an ecosystem. And the ecosystem it disappeared from has been operating without it for 12,500 years. The prey species that direwolves hunted have spent those 12,500 years without that specific predation pressure. The vegetation patterns shaped by those prey species have spent 12,500 years without the behavioral modifications that direwolf predation produced. The other predators that competed with direwolves have spent 12,500 years in their absence. Reintroducing an apex predator into an ecosystem that was built without it is not restoration. It has a different name in conservation biology. It is called introduction. And introduced apex predators have a track record that is instructive and not entirely reassuring. Part 5. What the ecosystem does. Wolf reintroduction to Yellowstone in 1995 is the most studied large predator reintroduction in history. The results were dramatic and not fully predicted. The wolves changed where elk grazed, changed grazing behavior, changed vegetation patterns. Changed vegetation patterns changed riverbank erosion. changed riverbank erosion, changed river courses. The reintroduction of one predator species produced physical changes to the landscape that researchers are still mapping 30 years later. This is called a trophic cascade, the ripple effect of a predator's presence through every level of the ecosystem below it. The gray wolf reintroduction to Yellowstone produced a trophic cascade that reshaped a national park over 3 decades. The direwolf was not a gray wolf. It was larger, it had different prey preferences, a different hunting strategy, a different pack structure. And it would be entering an ecosystem that has not had its specific predation pressure for 12,500 years rather than 60 years. The cascade produced by a self-sustaining dire wolf population in the modern North American landscape is not predictable from any existing model. It is a genuinely novel ecological event with no historical analog and no reliable baseline to model against. The outcomes could be restorative in ways that exceed anything wolf reintroduction achieved. They could be destabilizing in ways that produce consequences nobody anticipated. Almost certainly, they would be both simultaneously in different places for different reasons. And the decision about whether to allow it would be made by governments operating without legal frameworks, by conservation organizations operating without scientific consensus, and by a public whose understanding of the issue would be shaped primarily by the story of 3 white wolves running across a sunlit reserve in footage that Colossal releases on schedule and with considerable care for its emotional impact. Here is what happens if they survive. The concept of extinction changes. Not overnight, not for scientists who understand the limitations of what Colossal built, but for the public, for politicians, for the cultural understanding of what it means when a species disappears. The survival of Romulus and Remus and Khaleesi sends a message that no scientific caveat can fully contain. It worked. They came back. Extinction is not the last word anymore. That message reshapes conservation urgency. It reshapes the legal frameworks governing wildlife. It reshapes the political feasibility of rewilding programs that were previously considered too speculative to fund. It reshapes the timeline of every other de-extinction program currently running. And it reshapes the relationship between human technology and the natural world in a way that has no precedent and no established ethical framework to govern it. 3 animals on a reserve in an undisclosed location in the United States, getting bigger every week, running in the early light, not knowing any of this. Romulus does not know that his survival is a political event. He does not know that the question of what happens if he lives is being discussed in 17 governments and a dozen conservation organizations and the board meetings of every major wildlife fund on the planet. He does not know that the cameras watching him are not just monitoring his health, but documenting the proof of concept that unlocks everything that comes after him. He is just running, in the early light, on a 2,000-acre reserve with 10-foot fencing and drone surveillance, and a world outside the fence that cannot decide whether to celebrate him or be terrified of what he represents. Both responses are correct. That is the problem. And it is a problem that gets larger every week he survives. If the full story of what these 3 animals are and what they are becoming is what keeps you watching, our last video documented the behavioral data that nobody expected. Watch, the dire wolf pups are learning. That is the problem. Next, the northern camera, the maintenance schedule. The moment a 14-month-old wolf demonstrated cognitive behavior outside the gray wolf baseline, in ways the behavioral team is still writing up. The learning curve is the most important unanswered question in this program, and it is getting steeper every week.